Are you reassured?
Well, I think the most serious accusation this morning is that the former Chief of Defence Staff and his Permanent Secretary warned him about this revelation. Mr Werritty is not just a friend. He's been arranging meetings not with business but with government. I mean, one question that's got to be asked is who's funding him? We know that, for example, the Atlantic Bridge organisation funds him to the tune of £90,000 a year. You might have to ask Chris, well, he knows about that, because until the election, he was on the advisory board of the Atlantic Bridge organisation.
What do you have to say, Chris Grayling? This is not just a friendship, is it? If you have someone handing out business cards at meetings saying that you're an advisor to Liam Fox, and you have just said he is neither in government nor is he part of the Conservative Party's payroll, he's not just a friend, is he?
Well, I think when Liam's accepted that the business card should not have been there, but there's quite often a relationship between people in the think tank area and government ministers. You just have to think back to Gordon Brown and the Smith Institute, an example of a minister that was very close to a think tank.
Well, no, who is paying for his wages? Who's paying for his travel around the world? We know, because the Charity Commission had wound up the Atlantic Bridge organisation, you're receiving £90,000 a year. Until the election, you sat on the advisory board of Atlantic Bridge. So I'm sorry, you're not an innocent bystander in this, Chris.
Well, the fact is that very often you have close ties between ministers and individuals in think tanks.
Explain your role.
Explain your role in that relationship.
Well, I mean, I had little involvement with the Atlantic Bridge. I was merely one of a number of politicians on its advisory board. But, I mean, it wasn't a formal entity. But look, let's be clear.
It was a formal entity. I'm sorry, it was.
No, Adam Werritty was an employee of the Atlantic Bridge. There's no question about that. The Atlantic Bridge has now been wound up. Adam Werritty is now an independent businessman. But as I say to Kevin, you know, there have been many occasions when politicians have had close links with think tanks. You just look back to the Smith Institute.
But you were actually the advisory board of this organisation, which actually was paying Mr Werritty £90,000 a year. So you're saying you didn't know anything about it. I'm sorry. Well, you're not an innocent bystander, Chris, in this.
Of course I was.
So you did know about that?
Of course I was aware that he was employed by the Atlantic Bridge.
So you knew about this close relationship. Did you warn Liam Fox about that relationship?
No, well, I mean, I've had very little dealing with Adam over the years. I've probably met him once or twice over 5 or 10 years. So, he was not when, for example, we were running Liam Fox's leadership campaign, he wasn't in and around the campaign.
Even though he subsequently met him 14 times over 16 months. I mean, do you not think...
He's a friend.
Liam's allowed to have friends. Ministers are allowed to have friends. Well, we accept that, but it isn't usually accepted that someone as busy as Defence Secretary can make as much time as he did for somebody who is a friend, as you call it, when they were at business meetings in Dubai. Do you think it was acceptable that he met with the Sri Lankan president on behalf of Liam Fox? This is a high-level meeting. Whether it was official or not, do you think it was acceptable?
Well, my understanding is they both went to a lecture given by the Sri Lankan president.
No, we've got the pictures and we've seen it, the video shows. Do you think it's acceptable?
They met about that event, but the event...
He arranged the meeting.
Should friends arrange meetings for Defence Secretary?
Well, Liam, of course, had a long involvement with Sri Lanka going back to the days when he was in government.
You're dodging the questions here, Chris Grayling. I mean, if we're
looking... I said at the start of the interview that Liam accepts that he blurred the difference between a friendship and his professional life too much. He's apologised for it. He's put his hands up and said, I got it wrong.
But you aren't and haven't been as understanding when it's come to breaches of the ministerial code, which arguably there has been here. You said in 2005, when David Blunkett was under fire for having a third job without consulting advisory committee, I'm astonished that Mr Blunkett has broken the ministerial code on yet another occasion. This is getting beyond a joke. Should the ministerial code just go, or should it be should people abide by it?
David Blunkett went onto the board of a company
but never
for
mind.
3 weeks
in
a general election campaign,
we're talking about
bought
your
a stake
version
in
of
the
the ministerial
company,
code.
then went back into government, kept meeting his directors while they were bidding for business in his department. That's a very different issue to this one.
If people breach the ministerial code, should they go?
Well, it's a matter for the Prime Minister. I think it depends on the nature of it. But
you say your view. Should they go, or should we just get rid of the ministerial code?
Well, in certain circumstances, if people break the ministerial code, of course they should. But it's for the Prime Minister to decide whether someone has made a mistake. And frankly, ministers don't fess up and admit to making mistakes often enough. And as I say, if every time a minister in the previous government had made a mistake, there wouldn't be many left.
If there has been a breach of the ministerial code, should Liam Fox go?
Well, I'm not going to start talking about hypotheticals until we know the results of the report.
Well, so
Liam has put his hands up and said, I made a mistake, I got it wrong. And I think we should respect a decision like that by a Cabinet Minister. It doesn't happen often enough.
But in terms of the ministerial code, you have said, and you said there, that there's no point having a ministerial code if people continue to breach it. So you're basically saying in this case it doesn't matter.
I think in the case I was referring to at that time, this was about the third or fourth breach of the code within the space of a few days.
All right, so we're moving the goalposts here. Should he resign?
Well, the fact of the matter is Liam Fox has got to answer questions. This is not just a friendship. If you read the papers this morning, the meeting in Sri Lanka was arranged by Mr. Werritty. Outside of the Foreign Office, it seems that Liam Fox has got his own separate foreign policy for Sri Lanka, separate from the Foreign Office. Chris has dodged the question about his role, for example, in Atlantic Bridge, which has been funding Mr. Werritty.
The Atlantic Bridge paying for Mr. Werritty and the Smith Institute paying for Red Balls.
Well, because it's actually been closed down, Atlantic Bridge. You've had to close it down because the Charity Commission have actually said it wasn't meeting its charitable objectives.
Exactly what
no, it wasn't. I'm sorry, with great respect. What you've also been using it for, you've been using taxpayers' money to subsidise Conservative Party activity. Tax relief is well, it is. I'm sorry, it's a fact.
Well,
tax relief has actually been paid
for
that organisation.
Which you've got no evidence.
It is. It's a charity, therefore it gets charity relief.
The Smith Institute
and the issue you've got to explain is you're sitting here as though some innocent bystander in all this, Chris. You're actually on the advisory board of this organisation, which actually employed him.
You have made that. We're going to have